that's sort of what's happening in terms of when you're sending these questions in. It's like, you know that the training data associated with this has a certain subtextual
that
flavor.
uncle's gonna say something racist.
He's going to say something.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 473 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is June 21st, 22x4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thanks so much for letting us grab your money every month to help keep this podcast going. Now, today, we're just going to do questions. A lot of things are happening in the studio and life, but it's a lot of just the normal run-of-the-mill, we're just pumping out content and making tons of stuff. And, well, so many things are happening that it would just take...
hard to pick one to talk about, you know?
It's hard to pick one, and also, we probably talked about a lot of it at some point in the past anyways. It's, we're deep in the grind on Crashlands 2, and so it's just... more of the same but different, I guess. So we just thought we'd kind of focus on questions and kind of see what our listeners want to know about that and just get into that. So let's get into it. Highest upvoted question for today comes from Challosis, who says, after Crashlands 2, will you continue to build the capabilities of the game changer? Could it be used for other genres of games? So...
Well, will we be building games in different genres is also important.
That's a great question. Here's the thing. Yes, it definitely could be, and we'll talk about that. Could be used for other genres of games. Will we use it for that?
We will use it for the next things that we work on.
Yeah, whatever we make, we'll use it for. We have had a lot of internal conversations about like what do we want to do next, after Crashlands 2, and we have no idea because we've kind of run the gauntlet here of all kinds of different genres and styles of game, and we've done it in game jams as well. We've made card battling games, which we've done in game jams. We also worked on one for 6 months before scrapping that. We got our platformer maker, we got roguelikes, we got top-down adventure games, we got crafting. We've done a lot of different stuff. But something that kind of hit us when we made Levelhead was that once we had a successful game with Crashlands, then doing a hard pivot into a totally different genre, it was very difficult to bring the players into the next game, right? And so that's kind of it's more of a marketing question than a what do we want to do kind of question in terms of where we're going to go with that. So we don't know, but let's talk about the game changer in other genres and what that would kind of
the underlying concept of the game changer, which is just this separation of essentially the design data, the shape of things from the actual code that then reads and properly interprets those things that core concept is definitely something we'll be pulling forward for everything. The interesting thing about the game changer is that it lives inside of Crashlands 2. Right?
Yeah, so it would have to be ported to the next game.
Yeah. And there's a reason for that, which is that again, that super close proximity to the actual code base means that you get to, when you're doing things like looking at a creature or whatever else, you can just see a preview of what it would look like, in the game, because it uses the same code to run it right there in the preview window.
Yeah, which is a big reason why we did that, because we could have made a browser application that allowed you to edit the data.
Yeah,
but you wouldn't be able to see all the stuff that you're working on.
Because most aspects of a content management system, right? Because most of what you're doing in the game changer is just editing text and changing numbers and stuff, right?
Yep.
And for that kind of a thing, doing that in Game Worker is definitely not a good way to do it.
Not optimal. Right?
But because we have the stuff where we want to make sure that the stuff that we're looking at reflects what we're actually going to see in the game. And even though it's only a subset of the stuff, we were like, well, we really have to do that in here anyway. So just do the whole thing.
And
right?
doing it inside the game allows. So if you think about the way that people work on code is they use Git, which is it's a source control program where if let's say Adam and I are both working on a code project and I'm like, hey, Adam, I need you to, punch up the graphics on level 3 while I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go like make the main menu really pop, So we both have our two very explicit, specific tasks that we're working on.
Super easy to fulfill.
Yeah. In two different areas of the code base. And so we both have a copy of the code on our machines. And then when one of us is done, we commit and we push our code to a central repository. And so Adam, like let's say I push my stuff and Adam's over here still working on his thing. So whenever he's ready, then he can pull down my code changes, merge those with his, and then he can push his stuff as well. So it basically kind of lets people work independently in a way that like other people's stuff isn't going to break what you're doing in real time. And it lets you do experiments where you can be like, I wonder what would happen. And you can break the code and do all kinds of dumb crap, right? And then be like, never mind. And then revert that change and it's not going to hit anybody. So, the game changer works the same way. And the fact that it works locally on each person's machine within the game lets people do those kinds of experiments and then only push stuff out to other people once they've wrapped stuff up and tested it and stuff like that.
And you could conceptually do such a thing with an external tool, right? That still did all that stuff, like selects locally and all of that.
On your machine.
On your machine, but where you have like a local server set up so that the game is just talking to that tool so that as you're making changes, those changes can be instantly reflected in the game so that for stuff where you do want to be able to see like, I want to make sure I can see what this looks like in game because that feedback loop needs to be as tight as possible, right? So being able to, wherever you're going to edit it, being able to edit it there and instantly see or near instantly see, whatever that outcome is what we're going for there. And it is the case, like as this game has grown, everything about managing it all in GameMaker because it's not optimized for highly complicated UIs with fuckloads of elements, right? Yep. So it's like it's straight and under the weight as it goes.
It is.
So, but on the other hand, rebuilding such a thing that does all of the same stuff in an external tool, like so much of the original like investment cost of doing it was figuring out what even to do.
Yeah.
And then doing it in GameMaker from scratch, since GameMaker doesn't provide any game engine doesn't provide a way to like do that. That's not what they're for, right? So it is the case if we did like pull it out and try to move it all to a separate like web-based tool that then talks directly to the game, that would be a lot less work than the original invest. It's not like another 6 months, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But it's also still a lot. It's still
a lot, and then
a non-trivial kind of a thing.
It does a weird thing where now you don't know if what you see is what you're going to get. And that to me is the critical element.
Depending on how well everything talks to everything and all of that.
Because as soon as the tool is actually fully separated from GameMaker, then it's the case that the previews or, some of those things that we rely on to shorten a lot of times visual loops of work kind of get out of whack because as we've learned from years working GameMaker stuff, they tend to do things a little bit weird and not actually like correct in terms of, let's say you're applying some kind of a filter to something and you use certain terms of like this layer of the game should be a color add onto the layers below, or should be a multiply effect that does certain things to the colors below. GameMaker's implementation oftentimes is like slightly different than essentially what the standard is, in such a way that if you were to just sort of tell an external program, do this thing that already knows how, like a browser, you would actually get a very different.
Yeah, but that is still the idea, though. We wouldn't do that at the external. The external tool would be for the data management layer, but the idea would be running that at the same time that you're running the game, and the game knows how to talk to that tool so that basically previews can be updating in real time over there while you're editing stuff over here, right?
Got it.
Would be the idea. Like that's a doable kind of thing, and for the long term might be the kind of path we have to go down if we want to fully extract it and make it generalizable and make it like handle scale in the long term. But we were able to build a whole ass enormous game with it just built right into the game. So on the other hand, like, are we going to make a bigger game than Crashlands 2?
I mean, I feel like probably.
Yeah, probably.
Sort of can't help ourselves. But, it's really at that point, it's because what's kind of cool about the game changers, because it's in the game, then it uses cake frames, which is our our in-house UI management system. So all the UIs in Crashlands 2 are built with cake frames. And so if the game changer starts, kind of getting bogged down or it's running kind of slow, blah, 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 because of the strain of how much crap is happening in the UI, then any optimizations we do to solve that problem will then cascade out into the game as a whole and just make the game in general faster, right? So
there are benefits to the shared technology aspect.
I think the thing I'm actually most excited about though with it, and this is kind of the interesting one about like the genre question here, because there's bits and bobs from essentially just like they're generic bits and bobs about making games that all genres share, right? Or at least a lot of genres and subgenres have overlap on. So for example, like the way we've figured out how to conceptualize something like an ability, right? Someone uses an ability. And if you say those words as a designer, you're like, yeah, the player is going to shoot a fireball. There's 1,000 questions that actually have to be answered, right? This is the door problem all over again. But it's like, how long does it take to shoot the fireball? Can they move while they're shooting the fireball? Are they stuck standing still? What does
the fireball do actually when it hits?
How does it fly? How fast does it fly? Does it speed up while it's flying, etc.? Right? It's this insane litany of questions, right? So what's awesome about this though is that a lot of that conceptually does not change as you move between genres. So even if we said let's make a card game, but again, a lot of times in card games, someone plays a card, right? And then on screen, you see a character shoot a fireball, right? Or some shit like that. You can use a lot of the same, like we've already figured out on a really, really abstracted level how to think about these essentially general building blocks for designs in a way that will be really easy to move across to which kind of whatever we're doing next, right? And so I think that to me has been the main benefit of it. It's not like it's not necessarily, it's basically the specific ways in which we've had to solve because of how big Crashlands is, questions about what a player does, how a player animates, how the world works, how things react to stuff, etc. All of those can be pulled out and essentially reused, even though the implementation for them might be a little bit different, right? On like another game side. And that's the beauty of it to me. It's like, that's a thing we've never had before. Like, every time we've started a new project, you had to re-answer the same questions essentially.
Square one.
Yeah. Yep. Because you had to reprogram them to fit whatever the model was of, what you were doing. And so it's really interesting. I don't know what exactly that's going to mean for us, but I know it's going to be useful one way or another, right?
I'm just excited for working on a game where we're not spending half of the development time of the game making the tools to make the game,
Oh, yeah.
Because
but that's
and here's the thing, we're going to do it anyway.
That'll only happen if we make like Crashlands 3 with the intention of having it be like systems wise the same kind of thing, right? Because in any other, like if anything is going to change about how the game works and what kind of content is in there and that kind of stuff, then we're going to be working on tools. But
here's the thing. To me, there's a difference between working on tools and systems, right? Because like we could leave the game changer and not add any new features to the game changer, but add a whole bunch of new game systems that use the game changer. So like one kind of funny example that I always think about when people talk about like AAA games versus indie games, like AAA games tend to have games within them. So like something else like an Assassin's Creed game or something where like you could just like play a full ass chess game against a chess AI on a boat in the opening scene and then just like never again. Like,
or like
just
like Gwent, like a whole card game that became its own game.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you see that in AAA, but not necessarily in indie, because like in AAA, you could have a team of people within your team who design the game within the game, right? But for indies, we're stretched so thin just making the higher level game that then if you want to make
chess.
Yeah, if you want to make something within there, then suddenly you've got to like stop work on the main game and stuff like that. So with something like the Game Changer, if we wanted to add more complex stuff within the game or expand existing game systems, we can easily do that without having to like rebuild parts of the Game Changer itself,
Yeah, well, there's a difference between creating the tool for the first time and
iterating
maintaining and updating and improving the tool, right? Because creating the tool
that was a lot.
Because that was a lot.
Really.
And so kind of similar to like when we worked on Levelhead. So there was actually a 1 year period before we even started making Levelhead, I think, where Adam was building Rumpus and kind of like figuring out what Rumpus is. And then we ended up using Levelhead as like the testing ground to kind of ramp up the development of Rumpus and kind of create the web tech necessary to make Levelhead work. And so the difference there was like I still worked a lot on stuff in game for implementation of Rumpus because like obviously the game had to talk to Rumpus in order for levels to be uploaded and cloud syncing and all that stuff. But
it was a fraction of the time.
Yeah, like 98% of the time spent on Rumpus stuff was Adam's time working on the web stuff, and like 2% was like me in the game. But in the case of Crashlands 2, between the Game Changer and Cake Frames and all this other stuff, probably half of the time that I've spent working on Crashlands 2 has been in tools development, right? Which is a very different vibe. And so my hope is that, no matter what we do next, we can expand the tools we have, but that we don't have to take so much time out of moving forward on the game in order to do that.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be the case that basically making use of what we've managed to put together in the case of Crashlands 2 will definitely be far easier. That's like no doubt in my mind than this setup was. And then should make whatever the next thing we make just, I think, a little bit more fun to make. Because one of the interesting consequences of this is that actually for the last now, essentially 6 weeks or so, Seth's been the one building out the game world of Crashlands 2. And
because I don't have to write so much game code anymore to do stuff. So I can just work on I can actually work on the game's content, which I've never really gotten to do.
Or rather, you've only done it through code, right?
Yeah.
Weird, different.
I mean, it's similar to Rumpus too, right? Because like I did tons of work conceiving of and then learning about how to do like web tech at scale, and I was learning new technologies for the whole thing, and then eventually having what we call Rumpus that we use for Levelhead. And after we launched Levelhead, I've barely had to do anything to Rumpus, right? I've added like no features.
Yeah, and we keep using it. Like we're using it in Crashlands 2 for stuff.
Yeah, and it's like, and I have to touch it so rarely that every time I have to go back to it, it's a little bit of a nightmare because I'm like, oh god, I don't remember how this works. It's also old code at this point, so I don't like how any of it works, and it's not set up the way that would be optimal with all the lessons I've learned over the years, and all that kind of stuff. But it just goes now. It just works, and we get to keep like we're using it for Crashlands 2. We'll use it for the next game, right? It has solved so many problems just already that being able to switch between, like we work on the tool, we build the thing that allows us to do the thing, and then maintain it as long as the tool gets the job done well enough for as long as possible while you then leverage it to its fullest, right? Until you get to the point where the tool is no longer working for you for some reason. Like somehow there's a conflict between what you thought needed to happen back when you made this really complicated thing and what needs to happen today. Someday we'll be there with what the Game Changer is doing. But for the foreseeable future, it's a current tool. It does everything that we think we need it to do. And it would apply to any kind of game, as long as it's a Game Maker game that we wanted in. I think the other downside of having like everything built into the game is that it does have to be ported wholesale.
There will be that.
So you gotta that's gonna be a thing. And then once it's ported wholesale, it's only gonna be updated in the new title, right? So like as it'll kind of decay in the old one, right? While it continues to get fresher in the new one, right?
That's true. That is the big downside of the deep.
Well, it kind of it seems like a downside, but I also think about how like when we go back to add stuff to the original Crashlands, it's the same thing because like we had a web browser tool called the Crashlands Creator, and understanding like how everything fits together in code and doing anything in the original Crashlands takes like a week of archaeological excavation to get a sense of what the fuck is even going on before we can confidently do something.
Yeah. Well, and there's
like
because
once we got that context, it's fine.
Yeah, but there wasn't any general tooling in Crashlands 1, right? Because like everything in Crashlands 1 was designed for Crashlands 1, just like
it wasn't. But now there is Rumpus hooked, exactly.
That's what we've been building these more generalizable tools that now don't really follow that behavior anymore. We're now the tool gets to stay up to date, or I guess the tool is designed to be used by this title and the next one. Hopefully, But there are also benefits to being able to say, well, we'll just leave the thing as is in some place, right? Because that means you have to worry about backwards compatibility. Because the fact is, once a game is done, you might do a few, like immediately post-launch, you might do some big updates. If it's a huge hit like a Terraria, that might just be your job now, right? Or like a Stardew Valley.
In which case, hope we got good tools already.
Yeah, because you're just
in
that. Yep. But in most cases, after like 6 months or a year post-launch on a successful title, you are now winding down that thing so that now you're just doing maintenance and basic support, maybe tiny little features now and then, just to like celebrate something or whatever. But you're doing really small changes at that point. And then you've moved on to something new. And that new thing is going to take advantage of new people on the team, new techniques, new things that you learned. You're going to start from what you did on that one. So like we'll take all the code that makes up Game Changer and Cake Frames and all this stuff that we've been doing. We're moving to the new title, and now it's a hard fork. We're just doing new stuff. And like if we need new features, we're adding new features, right? And they won't exist in the original Crashlands 2 code base at that point. But that's also fine because the way it exists in Crashlands 2 supports what Crashlands 2 needs. Yep. And if you move forward with a tool that is meant to serve lots of purposes, and we see this with like Rumpus, right? Where there's a few things like that Levelhead is doing that restrict what Rumpus can do, right? Yep. So like I just look for it's just a random example I discovered a few months ago which is also it's in part because of how GameMaker works. But the details don't really matter, but there's a certain way of like processing web requests that come into the game. GameMaker does a bad job at handling, so we have to do some normalization. And there's one thing we missed normalization on, which at the time didn't matter. But then it turns out there's this weird quirk of the latest web way of doing web, HTTP 2, which is fast as fuck. It lets you do like a whole bunch of parallel requests. It's like it's the way the web is supposed to be done now, right? And so we just kind of automatically updated to be on that in Rumpus.
Oopsie doopsie.
And then discovered that there's this one thing that was then broken because of the absence of that normalization step and this one particular request, right? In Levelhead. But Levelhead is so hard to update because it has
not because of the game, but because it exists in so many places.
Yeah, deployment.
We got it. When we update it, we got to then go back through and publish
it's all code.
versions.
So
I would say to be clear though, I think it's as easy to update as it could be given that it's on. It's just that we did it on 7 platform, right? We did a really good job with all of our DevOps stuff. So it's just that,
you still got to test it on this platform.
Yeah, it's QA, the development, the testing, the QA, and the deployment collectively it's just so fucking labor intensive, right? That in the end, I was like, I guess we'll just revert back to plain old HTTP 1, right? Which is old as fuck. And now all of Rumpus has to do that just because of Levelhead, right? So you fall into these kinds of, and that's just going to be true indefinitely until we decide at some point, okay, we're ready to update Levelhead because the fix is in Levelhead. It's just not deployed, right? So you end up with this kind of a scenario where you have tools that you're trying to actually use the same tool that you're updating over time for general purpose when it has to serve old products, right? And in the games industry, unless you're doing live ops or unless you're doing adding to an existing game forever, which aren't necessarily the same, but can be, right? Then you're dealing with projects in your portfolio that might be 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years old, right? That you've been just keeping alive. But if they're all trying to use the same service and has to stay up to date and work with all of them all the time, then it becomes a nightmare.
Yeah, I think as that statistic came out recently that like 60% of all games purchased on Steam last year are more than 5 years old or something like that. Like it is a different era we're in now where like if a lot of these true hits, not even just like strictly multiplayer ones, right? But like even Terraria and stuff like that, just things that are very, very big games just continue on in a very
they stick around indefinitely.
Years.
Yeah. And there aren't that many of them, which is why they absorb a large fraction of all future sales compared to all the new titles and stuff.
I mean, hell, we just hit our highest peak concurrent players in Crashlands 2 weeks ago. I mean, we did a really, really steep sale and had tons of promotional events, but the fact is, like, it's a game from 8 years ago.
8 years old.
And people are still buying
we've done lots of other almost as steep sales over the years too, right? Like there's not that big of a difference because like the last we were doing like 80% sales for a while, like a past year at least. And we changed so that whatever 80% of $15 is, it's not very much.
Something.
Changed it to 90%. which is not a big difference actually, right? In terms of like the actual cost of the game.
I guess from like $3 to like $1.50.
Yeah, it's just like not that big. It's just still, it goes from like dirt cheap to really dirt cheap. I mean, I don't know.
To speck of dirt cheap.
Yeah. So these kinds of things could just happen where if you got a game that did work, it kind of just sticks around. And if we were trying to like maintain something that worked for OG Crashlands and works for Crashlands 2, and it's going to work for the next title, and it works for all the other stuff. And we have that with Rumpus, right? We have that with that. But there's a loose kind of relationship between this because it's basically it's for data syncing and authentication. That's kind of it. So it's the kind of thing that can kind of just keep going, remain unchanged for the most part, you know. But it is the case that anytime we touch Rumpus, we'd be like, okay, what is the impact on these 10-year-old games?
Everything. Yeah. So but the game changer, then it's like, yeah, we'll move it for, bring it forward. We can use it for whatever genre of game we want to. Ideally, the more we stick to what we've done, the more we can reuse and adapt. You know, like if we go make like an RTS, well, you know.
Yeah, I would say
the code base of Crashlands 2 is kind of out the window at that point.
Yeah, I would say beyond the first year post Crashlands launch, we're doing more support oriented toward that. I think whatever our next thing is, it'll hew somewhat close to the formula. Not necessarily have all the specifics. Not necessarily be Crashlands 3, for example, but try to make use of the same kind of like
well, I think it's gonna be
world
part of
structure and
I think that'll be part of the whole business logic. Is we'll have spent 6 months basically full time building out this tooling to work in a game like Crashlands 2 and to learn how to make a game like Crashlands 2 beyond that. And if the next title that we make doesn't leverage any of that, that's dumb.
What was the point?
That's a dumb business strategy. So we'll do something to try to leverage that so that the next title doesn't have an extra hole. Because Crashlands 2 basically has an extra like year and a half of
just raw
time behind it in order to make it possible to build it, right? And ideally, we could just take that year and a half of effort, plus everything we learned in actually building the game, and just roll that forward. Basically, which is equivalent to like cutting a year and a half out of the next title, Like
that's what I'd like to do.
That's the business move.
I'd like to get a game out after 2 years or something instead of 4. That'd be nice.
So what you're saying, Adam, is you want to do R&D, research and development, not RD&D, which is research and development, and then dump that shit in the garbage, right? Like you want to carry your knowledge and tools forward.
If the game doesn't, if you spend a lot of time building like a big technical infrastructure for a game that then doesn't pan out, then
you still got the tech.
It's a mixed bag though, right? Because it's like, you built the tool shapes the game, right? Informs the shape you're able to make.
Because the tool might not be good.
Yeah, the whole thing you're making with the tool might not be good. It's like making a bakery, like a shitty bakery oven or something that just like burns cookies. It's like, you spend a lot of energy making this oven, but it just makes shitty cookies. So maybe just put it in the trash, So
if it's a bad tool, you're gonna throw it away. But this is but you see this stuff all the time where some company is trying to make a thing in order to get there to build some tool, and they're like, holy shit, this tool actually is really good.
I mean, that's Discord. Came out of that. Slack came out of that. Like just tons of tools come out of that because it's 100% true that as soon as
we've got our own that we're cooking on, but we don't say anything about it for now. It's not the game changer.
We could say we won't name it, but it's a work management tool to replace all the infinite ones we've tried over time
to rule them all.
But this is the kind of stuff that was like you gotta trying to figure out how to recoup those investment costs. But that's the other way of thinking about this too, though, isn't even just about the specifics of the tools, but also the approach to doing the work. Because if you approach the work in a focusing on the kind of the theoretical ideas of like, how do we do this work well? And how do we abstract it as much as we can in a way that we try to like, when you're trying to solve a problem, try to really understand the shape of that problem in the most general way that you can get to, and then work your way back down to figure out how to solve it more like to the specificity you need in the current system, right? But by having that be part of the process, everything takes longer, definitely, right? And sometimes, like Sam said, you end up in a case where the thing you ended up with sucks anyway, and now you're like, oh, I spent all of that, like even more time than I otherwise would have, and the end result sucks, right? But you get to recoup a fuckload of that investment if you survive long enough to move on to the next thing, because you get to take all those lessons learned and the things that you did wrong, right? Not do it the next time, so you don't have to worry about that happening again. Like you get to roll all of this stuff forward. And so even if you can't do it just directly. So in this case, we're going to take the game changer directly and use it. But if we decided we couldn't, or if we decided it doesn't make sense to have it be locked in with the game and want it as a general tool, we've solved so many problems related to the design of the thing and the logic.
Yeah, it would take half the time or less.
It would
to do it again.
Even if we did
It's
it
like
in
a raw
fully different
implementation
system
at that point, right? It's not it's not thinking so hard about everything, which is
exactly.
really tough.
Now, speaking of doing things wrong,
What you got?
let's go on to the next question.
Sure, yeah.
Which is from Disgruntled Pineapple, who says, "Hey guys, what are your thoughts on the Google Gemini debacle?"
Which
I've heard people
debacle related.
I've heard people talk about it like it's a conspiracy, but it seems more like a well-meaning concept gone terribly awry. Should AI be allowed to rephrase questions for the sake of diversity, equity, and inclusion? So there's been multiple Google Gemini debacles. We'll talk about them probably, but I believe the one this question is referring to is the Black Nazi problem, which was they added image generation to Google Gemini, and when people would ask for representations of historical figures, particularly ones from groups that were like Nazis in the 1940s, who were, white. That was their whole thing. And when people said, "Hey, make me an image of a Nazi officer from the 1940s," and it would purposely behind the scenes rephrase their question to make sure that it generated images of people of all different ethnic backgrounds and stuff, but then in Nazi uniforms. Right. So again, yes, it's a well-meaning thing gone awry, but I think what people still are kind of grappling with about LLMs, which is what Google Gemini is that they don't have a relationship to the truth.
They don't know.
They don't know a fucking thing. It's based on their training data. It's based on their instruction set. And so another Google debacle, which I'm sure we've all heard about a bunch by this point, is that Google has added AI summaries to their search results. So whenever you ask it a question, then sometimes, because they're kind of rolling it out, right? Then sometimes it'll generate an AI summary at the top of your search results, where it'll kind of aggregate some info from the sites that it's pulled up. And so far, in my experience, that AI summary doesn't really say anything.
Useless. Yeah.
Yep.
It'll give vague generalities about stuff, some of which may or may not be correct. And then you're like, all right, well, that's not really it. And then you got to go scroll down and find a Reddit post or something, right?
The debacle there was that it suggested putting glue in your pizza to make the cheese thicker, and also
this comes back to the training data problem. So there was an Onion article that suggested that people should eat a rock every day to get their minerals that they need for their diet. Well,
but that wouldn't have to be an Onion article, because that's just the kind of thing that people would earnestly think is true and just say on the internet. Yeah,
it's floating around the internet. It's all there. The data that's being scraped for these, keep in mind, it's got Google gave, I think it's Google's partnership with Reddit was a $200 million contract, some crazy amount.
Google bought up Reddit. The rights to scrape all the Reddit data.
Right. They're not scraping.
Why would you do that?
They're not scraping academic journals. You're not scraping, I don't know, the Encyclopedia Britannica. You're just going to Reddit, which, spoiler, people say all sorts of completely insane things on there. And so again, it's all baked into the trading data. So when you ask a question, you're getting an answer from a really weird internet person,
Yeah. Well, I think this is the kind of the funny aspect about this kind of this angle on the question, which is this idea of is it okay for them to tweak the question that you're asking to get it different? And it's fine, because these are bullshit machines, and I mean this in the definition of the term, right? Because
you're going to get bullshit back anyway, so it doesn't matter if they rephrase the question.
LLMs are not connected to the concept of truth, so it doesn't so if I tweak and actually every single company trying to use LLMs to do stuff. So it's kind of like people say oh yeah, the real thing that is sold when you on a social media platform, what a social media platform is actually selling you is their moderation practices, right? Because that's what determines whether or not that's a sufficiently interesting. Because otherwise, if there's no moderation, it's just bots, porn, and
Nazis.
Weird far-right Nazi stuff, right? And that's it. And so moderation is the actual thing that is being sold on a social media platform. For tools that use LLMs, what they're actually selling you is how they're tweaking your responses.
Yeah.
or your request and what data they're sending to the LLM to deal with the fact that LLMs are bullshit generators. And I think there's an interesting...
They're trying to keep it on the rails. You know what I mean? Like, they've got to put a bunch of various things into the mix to make sure that the thing you get back is probably
actually useful. Yeah.
We'll get that it's better than a Redditor, than like literally randomly picking a Redditor to answer your question, which statistically is just not a good idea, right? So it's like, if you don't like the answers you get from an AI, that's why there's a lot of them. They're not all the same, right? You can, like, as far as whatever the little...
They use the same or similar underlying technologies.
Right, but the recipe they're using to treat your responses or whatever all their stuff they've come up with.
That's the special sauce. That's its whole job. So take like GitHub Copilot, right, which lives in your code editor and knows super useful, knows about every code project in the universe. The reason that it's useful at all is because the GitHub engineering team who's responsible for it spends all day, every day, trying to figure out, how do we scrape data out of your project? How do we understand what it is you're looking at? How to give you the best information at the time? What data do we send in what order? So their whole job is figuring out, like, how do we convert the stuff that you're looking at into useful stuff to dump into an LLM and then convert the stuff that comes back into something that, again, is, and how do we validate it and see if it's useful before it ends up hitting you, right? And it's doing a fuckload of stuff to get there. So like when the thing that you're using, that you're leveraging is and so I do want to hit the idea of bullshit because I think it's also fun and interesting, which is, there's a guy, I can't remember his name, but a while ago, who wrote this treatise called On Bullshit, which is like trying to define what bullshit is, right? And he defines it in a way that then other people now kind of like use as like the definition of the term to still get the sense of what people mean by it colloquially, but just a little bit of a stricter definition, right? And so the idea of bullshit is that it has a disinterest in the truth, right? Which is not the same as lying. Lying is knowing the truth and saying something else. Being truthful is knowing the truth and saying the truth. Bullshitting is saying things irrespective of the truth.
Not knowing or caring about the truth.
The truth is irrelevant.
Just saying stuff.
And so definitionally, like according to this definition of bullshit, which I can get behind, feels good, right? That's what LLMs are. They are bullshit machines because truth is disconnected from what they're doing, right? It's not about truth.
Yeah, which again doesn't mean that they're wrong.
Doesn't mean they're wrong. Yeah.
It just means that they don't care whether they're wrong, right?
It's irrelevant.
So this is so like when it comes to using Copilot in my own code, it generates bullshit, and a lot of times it's very useful bullshit.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah,
but
it can be bullshit and true and useful.
But also, some significant proportion of the time, probably at least a third of the time, it's useless bullshit. But at least it's kind of like in the realm of where I was going, and it's still helpful to kind of see what it outputs, and be like, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to use that. But what I think is kind of interesting, if you kind of zoom out, kind of globally in terms of like what is even going on with AI right now. Because this is where I think the conversation is. A lot of people like get so zoomed in on like the dumb crap, like Gemini telling you to eat rocks, right, or whatever. And they're I think people are kind of not really understanding where we're at, kind of in the trajectory of AI development, which is like there's specific AI, which is like just a program that's made to make decisions about specific things. Like this is how like we programmed like a chess playing program back in the 90s. And there was a lot of discussion back then saying like there will never be a computer program that can beat humans in chess because chess is so infinitely complex, right? And somebody figured out a way to make a chess playing AI that could basically calculate some number of moves ahead and try to make, the best,
probabilistically the best
decision, right? And that's all it could do.
Yeah, but if you go back to that original premise of like this would be impossible, right? Is because the number of permutations of what can happen in chess is effectively infinite,
essentially.
Which means that if the way that you're thinking about the problem is in order for a computer to win, like computers are good because they're fast, right? So if you're thinking, well, the way that a computer would win is by just calculating all the possible moves, right? That's impossible. It can't. And if you get trapped in that way of thinking, which is like that's how it would work, then that's true.
It's impossible.
It's impossible. That is true because if it tried to calculate all possible moves, it just wouldn't do anything because it would sit there calculating until the end of time, right? But that's not actually how chess AI works, right?
So people were clever and they figured out a way to
they use statistical models and figured out
cut that. Use statistical models, right? So that's kind of like where we were with like the very specific AIs, and then in like the 2000s and the 2010s, people started really getting into, and we had the computation available for machine learning, where you can create an AI that doesn't know anything, but it can recognize patterns. And then you can train it up on data sets, whether it's protein folding or playing the game Go, which is what that AlphaGo thing did. And those
although I should say the training isn't necessarily separate from the model, as in like
it's all part of
the model is constructed by having a way of looking at a data set that results in a model that represents basically statistical things about the original data set. So you can then say, well, what if I feed you new stuff that's not in your model, right? Or that's not in the training set, but the model was based off of the patterns in there. So can you see a pattern with this new thing that I've given you, right?
Yeah. So the problem we have right now is this. There's some spectrum of specific AI to general AI. So people probably heard the term AGI thrown around. And a lot of these AI companies are saying like developing AGI, that's our goal. This is OpenAI's stated goal. And AGI is a general intelligence, which means it's more like a human, where you can infer things and extrapolate and sort of see small numbers of things and then quickly understand the context and the relationships between those things.
We should say it has no strict definition, though. So every company talking about AGI has their own definition, and
you'll know it when you see it.
Yeah, and it's
so the problem we have right now is we have kind of a mismatch where LLMs feel like AGI because
they feel like they're thinking about stuff.
They feel like they're thinking about stuff, and you can ask them a big diversity of questions, and kind of like the chess problem, like how many possible sentences are there to create? An infinite number of sentences,
even more than ways to play chess.
Yeah, and so could a computer possibly convincingly converse with a human using language? Absolutely not. That would be insane. Well, guess what? We're doing it because people are clever and they figured out a way for it to work.
But we are doing it with billion with a B parameter models, right? Like
it's huge
because it has to represent the complexity of the problem. Yeah, exactly. And
it also has to represent the scope and complexity of the training data, right? And so what I think is the kind of like speed bump that we're at right now in terms of like where AI development is that LLMs look and feel like AGI, but they are not AGI. They are specific. They don't know what they're saying. They don't actually think. They do something that behaves like thinking in a lot of contexts, especially the context where you're applying it in a scenario that matches the types of training that this AI went through. Because you could say like the protein folding AI that's had all kinds of great breakthroughs and stuff. I would say like that thing is really good at thinking about protein folding. Like way better than a person. It's not thinking in a way a person thinks, and it can't think about pretty much anything else. But it's a really good thinker when it comes to protein folding. But you can't ask it about nutrition or whether. Well, but that's the thing is like
this is a good example because the thing about a language model, and I think the thing to remember is when people talk about AI, they're almost exclusively talking about large language models,
LLMs,
right? Yeah. So LLMs. But yeah, so when you think about a large language model, we can express almost anything in human language. That's the purpose of human language. We've been evolving it for tens of thousands of years or whatever as people, right? So we can express all kinds of stuff in all kinds of domains in natural language, right? LLMs are really good at processing natural language. It's disconnected from the meaning of it, right? So the output that you get is just related to the statistical behavior of language.
It's purely language in, language out, no experience or understanding.
But it's going to give you stuff that is valid language output, right? And it's going to be very related to the stuff that you put in, right? And I think this is interesting because like Seth, like you're saying, if you take like the protein folding model, right? And you were like, well, I want to see if this can solve other problems. You could convey any kind of problem that you care about, as a protein folding problem, because in the end, it's just data, right? It's just data. So you could come up with a way to say like, all right, I'm going to formulate this question, but I'm going to then
via proteins.
Yeah, then I'm going to map it onto DNA bases or onto amino acid chains, right? Because that's just encoding. This is already what's happening.
You're saying that we should call LLMs word folding machines, basically.
They're just word folding, yeah. But the point being that you could find a way to convert any problem that you care about, encode it into protein space, and then feed it to a protein folding thing, and it's gonna give you bullshit on the other side of it, right? Because its job is about folding proteins, and if the stuff that you feed it looks like proteins, but folding that thing doesn't make any sense, it's still gonna fold it for you, right? So you can't use the answer. But the fun thing about language models is they work the same way, right? Which is you feed it something you're trying to do, encode it into natural language.
Yeah.
And then it folds it, does some word folding, right? And gives you something on the other side, right? And if the thing that you're trying to express is well represented, not just with the data, but with what the data means in the training set, right? Then that's when you get to good outcomes. The problem is that natural language can be used to express anything. And so people confuse this where they're like, well, it can answer any question because I can encode any question into human language, right?
Yes.
And it processes human language. Therefore, the answer is in human language. Therefore, this all relates, and this is the idea of like why it gives you something useful, right? But it only gives you something useful. I guess it'll always give you a result. But that result is only useful if the question that you're asking and the way that you're asking and so on is represented by the stuff encoded in the training set.
Yeah. So this is where
if the training set is everything, which is what LLMs do too. It's like,
what they're trying to do.
It's like everything, right? Then whether or not the thing that comes useful on the other side, who knows? Because now there's not a strong mapping between the encoding of what's in the data set.
Well, the point is it still doesn't matter, right? Because because the problem is that what you're looking at is there's a step difference where you as a user, say, coming up to an LLM or a chatbot. So you mentioned doing this encoding, right? You're basically converting some meaning of something into language. Into
natural language, yep.
The LLM is converting your language into language.
Yeah,
but
the
not your
encoded
language
thing.
Yeah, but not your language into meaning and then back into language, which is what a person does. And so that's the whole.
But the thing could have meaning if the encoding between what you're doing and what's encoded in the training set are tightly coupled. Then it could still have meaning. It could happen. What
I'm saying is that it could still have meaning, but the meaning is generated by you on the other side.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. You take your meaning, you convert it into language. The model takes that language, converts it straight into other language.
Yep.
And then you
apply
have that meaning question. Yeah. And so, but it's not like a person where the person there's usually one more step in the middle there of the person receiving that initial language, converting it into meaning, etc.
So what I think is then kind of happening with the Google Gemini debacle, all that stuff is like people are believing or feeling that these things are general intelligences because, like Adam was saying, we can use language to represent just about anything. Right. And because the training set for these things is huge volumes of language, they feel incredibly general. They don't feel specific. It feels like you can kind of ask it whatever. And like, honestly, it is the case that
you can ask it a lot.
Yeah. You can ask a lot, and you can actually have like a good conversation with one of these things. You can learn stuff. You can have like a deep philosophical debate with it. Like you can kind of do.
If the stuff you're asking about is really well represented in the data set and the way you're asking about it is well represented in the data set in connection to that stuff, right? Then
clear.
Then the outcomes you're going to get are actually going to be tightly correlated with the kinds of answers that are represented by the stuff that's in the data set, right? And so if that loop is really tight and like accurate, then you can have it's still disconnected from truth, right? Because just because the data is in the data set doesn't mean it's true either, right? Even if what you get accurately represents the data set, that doesn't mean it's true either, right? But it can do a really good job. And if you play with these things, you'll see it, right? It's like so like as an example, like Seth uses Copilot for GameMaker. GameMaker, not well represented in the data set, right?
Copilot doesn't know shit about GameMaker language.
Nope. I use it for TypeScript, which is like the number one language on GitHub, or maybe number 2 behind Python or something like that, right? But like it's way up there, right? It's fucking good. It's really good, right? It still gives me bullshit a lot of the time that I don't want, but the bullshit it gives me is valid TypeScript, like syntactically at least.
Yeah.
The bullshit Seth gets is very frequently not valid game maker at all, just syntactically or anything. And you can
it's getting better all the time though.
Yeah, and it keeps getting better because of the engineering, and it's not because like the models are getting better. That's true, right? But they're not really retraining up data sets all the time. That's actually not where the most of the gains are coming from, like on a week to week basis. Those are coming from the engineering team doing all this wacky prompt stuff where they figure out how do I take what you're doing, represent it, and feed it into the system so I can get back stuff that better represents what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So I think kind of like the way that I'm kind of viewing AI stuff right now is like it's almost like cars versus planes versus rockets or something like that. Where like right now, the AIs we have, they feel like we can go anywhere because we're not used to having cars. Cars is a brand new thing for us, and suddenly we can go anywhere, right? Except we actually are stuck to the ground. Like there are a lot of constraints actually, and also like we got to stay on the roads. We got to stay on places people have already paved, right?
Yep. And some cars can't even go on a gravel road. Sometimes.
Yeah, and so there's still a lot of limitations to it, and then it's like, well, there is some next phase where, once we get planes, the airplane version of AI, then suddenly we'll be able to travel in a whole different dimension. We'll be unconstrained by roads or whatever. There will still be constraints like, well, with an airplane, you got to go to an airport and take off and land. And there's a lot of security problems and all this other shit, right? But it does open up a whole new dimension. But also, like you're stuck in the atmosphere. It's an air breathing. Like there are still constraints on that kind of thing, right? And so I feel like we're kind of still in the early. It feels like we are really far along because interacting with an LLM, it feels like you're talking to some kind of oracle. Like whatever you ask it, it will answer confidently and often correctly.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Maybe even more often than not correctly.
Depending on the kinds of questions you're asking.
On what you're asking, right? Yep. But it's still not thinking or genuinely understanding what's going on because it has no real world experience. It doesn't know about.
Well, again, it doesn't convert to meaning before it converts to language.
Right. It just makes connections.
Yeah, I think another way to think about this too is if you think about like LLM's notoriously terrible at math, right? Because again, math, because the way that math works well, there's an efficiency thing here, right? So like with math, the symbols mean something, and there are algorithms you can apply given the set of symbols you're looking at to get a correct and guaranteed answer every time, right? Mm-hmm. If you understand the symbols and if you know those rules, then you or a computer system or anything can guaranteed, given a math problem, get the right answer every time, right? Mm-hmm. That's an algorithm that just like is a series of steps. Here's how you do the thing, whatever. That's it, right? If you try to apply an LLM, if you try to apply a machine learning to math problems, you do something very different, which is you feed it a billion math problems and their solutions, right? And then you end up with this weird set of like statistical model that represents all of that. And then you feed it new problems and see what happens, right? Sometimes it'll be correct. Sometimes it won't be, right? Because it's just not connected to that, right? So there's certain domains where
if you think about math as this like pure meaning, right? Like there's no
or it's an unambiguousness in meaning in a way that allows machines to do it because you can conceive of, or somebody can. I can't write those algorithms, but there are people who can like figure out, oh, here's the algorithm to like go from here to here, right? And you can think about this in like any other context where these things will or won't be useful. So the idea of like using LLMs in games in general, to me, complete nonsense. I can see it in some aspects of development of games, but not like in a game, right? Or like, or these kinds of.
If it's in a game, it has to be the game, if that makes sense, because of the
nature of it, right? Yeah, but if you're gonna be like putting models in a game so that they can like try to give answers to questions you have about anything about the game, right? It's the least efficient way you could possibly do that, and it's going to be wrong sometimes.
It's just going to mislead players.
Yeah, so no matter what it's doing, like the better move in a lot of contexts is still going to be to have good algorithms that do the work for you. But that's only, like Sam, as you're saying, that's only the case where the meaning side can be fully articulated in a way that can be mapped onto a set of then things to do to get an answer on the other side. And for large language models, that's not well articulated, right? There's not a well articulated input output kind of thing. There's just a giant statistical model that gives you whatever, right?
Yeah. Now, something I want to caution about though, because like all right, so it's like AI as people currently talk about it as LLMs. They're bullshit generators. They don't have any understanding of the truth. But I'm like, we're all trying to be very careful to hedge this thing. Like, that doesn't mean that they are useless.
Oh, yeah.
All right. They can be very useful when applied in certain contexts and
It's
all
like
that.
with any
But,
tool.
yeah. But what I think a lot of people are kind of, because like a lot of people are, there's big conversations right now about whether AI is overhyped or whether it's like, vaporware, like crypto, that kind of stuff. And people keep talking about what it can do right now. Like, it just takes me back to like conversations about how like a machine will never be able to beat a human in chess, right? There are so many people putting so much money into trying to find like the next stepwise function for how to make these things much, much smarter in new ways, make them able to extrapolate or be able to reflect and have better relationships to the truth. Like, these are problems that every company wants to solve who makes AI, because whoever cracks that holds the key to a huge economic choke point. Because if you think about it this way, like if you can basically like manufacture experts, right? Yeah. Like who are really good at thinking about things, and anybody on the world can rent those experts from you, essentially, then you now kind of hold like a choke point on talent. Mm-hmm. And you can just sort of hoover up infinite money for some amount of time, right? That's the theory behind it. And so like a lot of people are really invested in making these things improve really fast.
I do want to say, I was very happy to see, because usually, we've talked a lot about, missteps of the various big tech companies, and Google Gemini, of course, is an easy one to talk about. Apple is doing integration in the phone itself of the AI, mm-hmm. in a way, and basically in the ways that we talked about. We were like, why isn't someone just doing this where it's useful, where it's basically a deep integration? So you can just tell it stuff and it'll like actually do the damn thing you're asking it to do. Like, hey, could you just send a text message to Fred about this thing? And actually this, and then it'll be like, all right, and it just fucking does it. Or you'll get a text from someone and you're like, hey, could you put that in my calendar? And it's like, yeah. And it just fucking, it actually
but that's the thing is because what you're talking about basically isn't general. And that's actually why it's good.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is
this is why GitHub Copilot is good, is because it's about code, right? Yes. And it tries to focus on the language, like the code language that you're using and so on and so forth, right? And that's why it can be good in those contexts, right? Mm-hmm. So I have kind of a different, so Seth, on this idea of like, people are focusing on like what it can do now, right? And I would argue that that's the only thing that makes any sense, because everything else is snake oil, right? Because it may be true someday that every problem in the universe is solved with AI or whatever. That's all. That's possible. I think of this as cold fusion, right? Which is like, it's just around the corner, might be tomorrow.
And it always has been.
It always has been. Might be in 1,000 years, right? Yeah, we may end up with it. That's true. But I think it doesn't, if you're selling a product based on what it can maybe do in the future instead of what it can do today, you're selling snake oil. That's what I think
Seth's point is that regardless of what you're selling, that the target, because the economic gain would be so big, if you happen to be the one to crack cold fusion, to crack generally, right.
I get that.
That is what the impetus is for everything. That's why everyone's up in money.
But I disagree with that too, though, because that's not why people are jamming LLMs and everything. There's almost nobody on the planet.
Not jamming LLMs and everything. As in, like, that's the reason why so many large companies are basically on this warpath of investing just like an unimaginable sum of money into trying to.
But they're trying to, and that's fine. But we shouldn't be seeing that. Right. What we're seeing in the marketplace is untested integrations that are loosely coupled to the thing, because there's a FOMO thing happening here where everyone's like, well, if you're not first, you're last. If we don't do this, we're going to be left behind.
That's the aspect that's the same as the crypto thing, where there's
it's identical.
Like, fucking everybody was like, we're putting blockchain and stuff, and we were just like, why?
You don't need to.
That's why I'm saying, like, I think I want to caution people against talking about how like this is like useless hype. That's kind of where I'm going because
it clearly isn't in the sense of like, if you look,
it depends on which part of it you're talking about.
Yeah, if you look at the success of Copilot, even the success of ChatGPT and stuff in terms of providing utility to people, right? Providing actual value, they are creating a lot of value
and providing damage, because they're providing real damage. And the thing is,
like,
too, right?
Like Google Gemini, like I haven't found its search summaries to be particularly useful, right? But I've also never seen it recommend me something dangerous or stupid, right? And when we talk about like the examples of like dumb things that Google Gemini has recommended to people, there's like 3, right? Like there's like 3 examples that like popped up on the internet. And I think one of them was actually Photoshopped. And so like, it's really easy to be like, wow, look how stupid this thing is. It told people to eat rocks, right? And that is very stupid. But really what it is it's a misapplication of the AI in a way that people are going to not understand what it's doing, like what it's useful for. And it's going to make people think that it's a useless piece of crap when actually it just doesn't fit the problem because it is a specific AI, not a general one, right? And so,
well, but these are just separate things. I think that's why, like, I think whether you're avidly for AI or like think that it's going to do something really interesting or avidly against it, I think the problem is that we're not talking about the same stuff. Like when you're talking about like, because when I talk about LLMs being bullshit, I don't mean general AI because that's a different thing. Like that's an unrelated thing, but it doesn't have anything to do with it, right? So when I say like AI is bullshit, I'm talking about what everybody is currently calling AI, which is LLMs, right?
And you're also using bullshit in a very specific
I'm using bullshit in a specific way, but it's two ways.
One is it doesn't have value. It's that it doesn't care about the value it's producing.
And that almost every use case it's currently being used for does also not provide value. It's a misapplication of the tool and what it's for. And so because of those things, like to me, AI right now, bullshit space. It's crypto. It's the same space, right? Which doesn't mean like there are probably some use cases for crypto. I've still never heard of a good one, but as a technology, there's got to be something that maps onto it. Right? But we know there are problems that map onto what LLMs are good at. We know that there are people actually doing it, right? There are really smart people with either making new projects from scratch that now tightly couple these things, or they're like with Copilot, GitHub Copilot, they're figuring out how to work it in. Or you have things like Microsoft Copilot, fucking useless, right? So it's like, so you have people that are jamming it in because like that's what everybody's doing right now. They're trying to make sure they can keep their shareholders happy so they can say, hey, we're doing AI stuff, right? But you do also have a tiny subset of people like actually doing real, useful, cool stuff, properly applying what LLMs are good at to some problem domain. And so, I think in general, when I hear people talk about LLMs being bullshit, I'm in that camp because I'm tired of being bombarded by like everywhere I look. Everywhere I look, there's a new button where I can like generate bullshit. Like everywhere I look,
it's true.
I don't want it. I'm tired of it.
It's true. But I think the challenge is if you equate it with like crypto in terms of like an equivalent bullshit space, I think that's probably where, depending on who you're talking to, you're going to lose what you're actually trying to convey in that, right? Which is because these tools, like you said, are actually useful for a large number of things when applied specifically and, with good
when trained for that purpose,
which is that's actually just a different thing than like kind of what's happening in the crypto space. Even though you could argue that crypto is very good for like laundering money.
Yeah, it actually is. That's true. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, there is one fantastic use case of crypto too. One is laundering money, and 2 is scams.
Yeah. Yep.
It's really good.
A lot of innovation in that.
And we shouldn't pretend like those aren't real purposes because they are, and
they are very useful,
and they're very good at that.
Yeah. So. So I mean, all right. So I guess kind of to wrap up like with the Google Gemini thing, I never really thought of it as a debacle so much as just a hilariously stupid misapplication on the part of Google, like to not understand what the hell they're doing with this. Like it was a rush job. Like Adam and Sam were saying, everybody's
they shouldn't be used for this purpose.
That'd be the
and they can't be.
They can't be
any solution because what the problem they were trying to solve for this particular one of the example is that our training sets are racist as fuck, right?
Our training sets are just white people.
Yes,
the training sets are racist because that's how racism works. Is you build up a corpus of data that then is inherently racist, right? So that's just true. So and that's the data we have though. That's the only data we have. If you want as much data as possible, right? So when you feed that stuff into it, you're going to have stuff that's true where like, Nazis were white people, right? Like that's a true thing that also has race in it, right? But you're also going to have fuckloads of not true stuff. That's just because the data set is racist, right? And so if you're going to try to then make this LLM be a general purpose oracle for the people, right?
And not be racist.
You literally can't. It's not possible because
it's basically saying what you're doing is it's like if you invite your racist uncle over, right, for Thanksgiving, and then before Thanksgiving you're like, hey, could you just not be racist today? And they're like, I'll try to keep it in check, right? That's sort of what's happening in terms of when you're sending these questions in. It's like, you know that the training data associated with this has a certain subtextual
that
flavor
uncle's
to it.
gonna say something racist.
He's gonna
about
say something. Yeah.
Don't say anything racist. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
That's
I know
Because
you got
that
in
uncle's
there.
got a deep, really racist training set.
Yeah, because that's the only, and that's
So-
because the fact is that that's the only thing you can do if you're going to be like, hey, general purpose chatbot, whatever, right? That uses this data set. The only thing you can do to keep it from accurately representing its racist data set
Yes.
is encourage it not to.
is to
time somebody asks a
generally
question.
encourage it not to.
Generally, yeah. And so to me, like, this is a funny but also really telling outcome of this fundamental problem, right? Of like why this is a bad application, but also like a constant reminder that algorithms are biased, and especially ones that are built off of inferences from data sets, because data sets are even more biased inherently than any
I think
given
in short,
algorithm is.
if a particular LLM is basically adding stuff into prompts to try to make it do anything, that is, I think, should be expected as part of the course, because it just is the case that the general data set will, over time, you'll find have certain things about it that you're like, not super helpful, actually, not super true, whatever. So you got to put those guard places.
And again, that's actually what you're signing up for when you use any LLM.
It's less of a leftist agenda thing and more of a, hey, we know this data set was kind of fucked up, So could you be like, hey, could you be a little less fucked up when you give this answer? And the data set's like, gotcha.
Yeah, the AI is like, I mean, I'll try. And
it can't
not giving me much to work with here.
Yeah, but it's like it can't do it with any specificity, right?
Exactly,
Because
it doesn't know what it's doing.
It doesn't know what it's doing.
It doesn't understand. Yeah. So you can't train up an AI on a racist data set and then be like, could you
and then try to delineate all
could
the
you
racist
add
things.
more diversity to the images you generate? And the AI is like, got it. I got you, fam. No problem.
I totally understand the prompt.
And then you get that.
Yeah.
So,
So to me, honestly, it's a good thing. To me, it's a good thing that this insane, badly applied robot spits out Nazis with different racial appearances, because that means that somebody is trying to overcome the inherent deficiencies and biases built into the data set. And there's no way to do it gently. Like, there's no way to do it accurately, because that's not what these things are for.
It does not have accuracy. Okay.
and it just so happens that this particular way of trying to push against the bias highlights the fact that these models don't have any fucking idea what's actually going on. Right?
Because again, to me, the takeaways, when you see this outcome, to me, the takeaways, there should be two takeaways here that are actually happen. And neither of them are, isn't it dumb and bad about how woke this model is or something, right?
Yeah.
But the actual takeaways are the fact that people had to do that means that is a reminder that every data set has
a bias.
Is biased. And it doesn't have to be a racist bias. Depends on what the data is, right? But if it's possible for it to be racistly biased, it probably is. But it's also going to be biased along any other dimension, just depending on what the data is, right? So this is one of those things what it's revealing to you is interesting. It's revealing to you that people are like, oh yeah, our data set is really biased along racial dimensions, so we're trying to compensate for that. That's actually the takeaway that's really interesting, that tells you something about data and how these models are created. And the other thing is oh, look how hard it is to deal with the fact that this isn't a truth machine and its data is biased, right?
Doesn't really know anything.
Doesn't really know anything. Look how hard it is to deal with that fact. Isn't this interesting? And I'm glad people are trying. That's my takeaway, right?
Yeah. But everybody's got to make a big fucking deal out of everything. It's generating these stupid images. It's telling people to eat rocks. It's like, yeah, but also,
to me the big deal is it shouldn't be there. That's not the right application of it.
Yeah. And also, the person asked, "How many rocks should I eat every day?"
Yeah,
nobody fucking Googles that. Nobody Googles that. That's somebody.
What the search was?
Yeah, this is somebody who's like, wow, look how dumb this AI is. I wonder if it has dumb answers to dumb questions. And it turns out, yeah, it does. Right?
Yeah, but
it's
it's
also
important
to play ball. It's like,
but you can't always tell. The only time that you personally know the difference between a dumb question and a not dumb question is if you already know the answer, right?
Oh, 100%.
So if someone's been telling you about all the rocks you should eat, because I guarantee you there's some fucking influencer out there telling you how many rocks you should be eating.
Probably some real tasty rocks out there. That's why.
Yeah, and honestly, if you're listening to that, you should listen.
Just so but you only know what you know, right? And so all of us have questions that we would ask that are actually stupid questions. We just don't know that yet. And if we ask a stupid question and get an equally stupid answer to a system that implies that it's giving us the truth, right?
Mm-hmm. that's where it goes wrong.
By its mere existence, because the fact is it doesn't matter if they add like a text caveat that's like, hey, LLMs are known to hallucinate, aka bullshit, right?
Make shit up.
It's like, yeah, that doesn't matter if the presentation of it is like, hey, here's this friendly robot that it answers your questions, you know? It's like,
yeah, I think metaphorically I'm trying, because it's also kind of like it's like, if you ask your parent, like, how many rocks should I eat a day, right? Your parent would be like, what the fuck? Like, don't eat rocks. Simple. I'm not answering your question.
The framing of the question implies that there is some number that you should be eating.
But a better answer as a parent would be like, why do you think you should be eating rocks?
Where is this coming
from?
Well,
that's the second answer after you're like, don't fucking eat rocks. Okay, we'll get that cleared up. Why are you asking this, right? But my point here is that like the LLM, or like getting answers from something that just answers your questions like this, where it feels like it's a parent, right? Giving you, it's like this ultimate source of knowledge, answering other questions. But in reality, it's more like you're like a really high friend.
Yeah.
You know?
It's your crazy high uncle.
Yeah. Who's just like, oh, yeah, you should eat like at least a bucket of like just the gravel rocks you can find in your driveway every day. You know, you're right. You should eat rocks.
I mean, another way to think about
vibe.
This. Yeah. Another way to think about this though is like, as you hear people in older generations talk about how, like, you know, back in the earlier days when you wanted to know something, and also this was true for us when we were kids because we were kind of pre-internet, right? When you wanted to know something, if you didn't already know it, then you just had
get to know.
You either didn't get to know it or you had to ask somebody. And who
make
a
trip to the library.
Yeah, you would ask people. You would ask an older person, or you'd go find a book, right? Mm-hmm. But usually you just ask somebody older in your life, in your group, right? And we are trained. Yeah, we are trained from birth that not knowing things is bad and being wrong is bad, right? And so you would get an answer, and like part of the established for all of time way that things would work. This is basically what culture is, right? And what traditions are. Is you would ask somebody, you would ask your parent or your grandparent or whatever. You'd ask them something, and they would just have an answer for you. They would have something. That's your truth now, right? And you move on with that. But similar to LLMs, that wasn't necessarily connected to the truth, right?
Yeah,
because they provided
a crazy racist high uncle who was telling you about.
Yeah, it could have been true, could have not been true. It's basically disconnected. And so if you think of it as like that's what LLMs are, is that their job is to always give you an answer, true or not.
Yeah,
right.
And again, like I've said it before, LLMs are people. Treat them like people. So if you see, here's Google's AI summary. Imagine that you Google something, and then just some dude just come up, taps you on the shoulder. He's like, "Hey, I got that."
Yeah, they're like, I just skimmed this real quick, and here's what I think about it.
Yeah, let me tell you. Here, I got it. And then they just tell you some stuff, and you're not gonna be like, "All right, thanks, random dude." Right?
Yeah.
You're gonna be
Who
like,
are you?
Okay.
Is the question you should ask.
You're like, okay, like that sounds maybe right or maybe not. Let me go. I'll look into it a little bit.
And if
right?
you ask that person their credentials, and they're like, "Well, I've read literally everything." Right? It's like everything. So like true stuff. Did you think about any of it? It's like, well, no, but I did read all of it.
I am an idiot, but I did read everything.
Can you add two numbers together? Nope.
What is math?
That's not
2 + 2 is 9, but I'll tell you all about like, I don't know, Tchaikovsky or something, you know, but 2 + 2 is also 9. Mm-hmm. You know, it's one of those, got to take it, got to figure out what's going on.
It's the character from Adventure Time who has approximate knowledge of many things. I love that. Right? Yeah. It's like, it's going to get you in the ballparks a lot of the time, but man, use your critical thinking skills because these things they're not there yet.
Yeah, but I think there is that problem of like, because I agree completely that the idea is, and this is how I treat LLMs too, is I treat them as I would a person, right? But I'm extremely, my assumption is always that everything I hear is wrong, right? From any person, from any reading source material, whatever. But that's not people's default assumption with people either, right?
Correct.
So it actually doesn't help most people to treat LLMs
just
as
treat
people.
it like a person.
Yeah, there's an intent problem, which is
so. I think the high friend is probably a good. It's like
treat
LLMs like your high friend. Like what they're saying, they might know, but also they're high.
Yeah.
So
also not actually your friend. They don't care about you. They don't care about what you're trying to.
A high stranger on the bus.
Yeah,
you know, if you just tapped out, if you see somebody with super red eyes on the bus, just kind of staring off in the middle distance.
Yeah, imagine
that's how you're on the shoulder.
Yeah,
and ask them, how many rocks should I eat? And you're like, bro, like 2 probably. Right? Yeah. You're like, yep, that tracks. That's AI. That's where LLMs are right now, as applied in things like Google Gemini, and
that's also where they'll stay because that's what they're for. That's what they do.
Yeah, and they'll be kind of integrated into like new architectures or whatever.
And people will get better at converting the questions into things that give you more useful outputs, and then converting those outputs into more useful outputs, right? That's where the benefits come from. They do not come from just shoving a fucking LLM chatbot into every service in the univerce.
Yeah, so quit it.
So quit doing that.
So that's where I guess that's where we stand on the Google Gemini debacle. So that's all the time we have for this week. I would like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. Go ahead and check out the demo as well. That's still up. You can give it a play. All that activity helps to boost the game's visibility, and it'll help it have a successful launch, and we'd appreciate it. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.